Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's been a hot minute, like 5 years since I last made a YouTube video. I wanted to make this video because several months ago I was playing Grounded and Valheim, sort of back to back, and they both have a similar mechanic, which is the base raiding mechanic, where enemy NPCs kind of wreck your shit, and I had opinions about it, and so I just wanted to talk about it for a bit. If I had a blog, this would have been up there, but I already have a YouTube channel, so why not? So if you've never been here, this is who I am. I've been a level designer for 10 years in the video game industry. I've worked on mostly AAA stuff. I started in the industry early 2000s in QA, and I kind of just wanted to talk about things. So here's my agenda. First and foremost, I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. If you love this game, you hate this game already, that's cool. I'm not trying to evangelize here. I'm trying to just reconcile my own thoughts about it and just kind of talk about it from my own perspective. So we're going to go over the Valheim mechanics, the grounded mechanics, and friction points for both. And then at the end, some proposed solutions. Proposed solutions are kind of sticky because one of these games is released and one of these games is in early access, and anytime you sort of... Solutions is sort of the wrong word because it implies something is there to be fixed, and you don't really know what the developers have already tried and ruled out and what their intended experience was, so... Sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I kind of felt that it was needed as something positive at the end, because, spoiler alert, I don't really like one of these mechanics, so it kind of felt kind of negative slanting. So, alright, anyways, let's get into it. We're going to go over Valheim first, and this is a lot of the chunky, nitty-gritty mechanical details, so this is kind of going to be a bit dry. Sorry about that. So... both games kind of have the same components. You have tiers of progression, you have a bunch of conditionals for when a raid occurs, and then you have different frequency or how often a thing can spawn in. So Valheim is a world-based game where you can create clean worlds, but carry over your character and their inventory. So that sort of is to account for... one of these systems is to account for that kind of game. But anyways, so the tiers of progression is based on the boss that you have killed, or sometimes the enemy you've killed, or sometimes that has just died, because it doesn't necessarily need to be the player character killing that enemy. It just has to be in that world. It can also be based on items you've gained. So, like I was saying, it's a world-based game. You can go into another world... You can get the best of the best endgame items and bring it into a clean world, and then you'd be like, haha, no base raids. But no, the game accounts for that. And then some tiers of raids are canceled by others. But to give a overly reductive example, at the beginning of the game, you're in tier 1. You kill that boss, it gets you access to the next tier of materials. You're in tier 2. And so the tier 1 raid doesn't happen when you have access to tier 2, and so on and so forth. That isn't a hard and fast rule across the entire game, but for the purposes of this talk, that's just kind of the example that I'm giving. The raid conditionals are pretty easy. You need to be in the specific biome, the area where the raid occurs. So to reduce this even further... fire elementals will never attack you if your base is like in an icy area. That doesn't actually exist in Valheim, I don't think. But just as that's what that means. You just need to be in the correct biome for a correct raid to be able to raid you. You can't be within a dungeon, which is sort of like a separate instance area. I believe it's separated by a loading screen, so I assume so. And then you have to be within 40 meters of 3 base structures. Base structures are broadly categorized as anything you build as the player character. So walls, floor, a roof. It could be like a workbench, like other utility structures, like a forge or something like that. This isn't also 100% like across the board in terms of what raids can raid you. The wolf raid specifically can happen anywhere. So yeah, it's sort of variable. As for frequency, it happens every 46 minutes. There's a 20% chance of a raid, and 1 day is 30 real world minutes. Um, if it happens every 46 minutes, there's a 20% chance. That roughly means there's a 50% chance of a raid happening within 3 cycles. So that's like 2 hours or something. And okay, so everything has happened, right? You've killed some bosses, so you're in a tier where a raid can happen. You are within 3 base structures, or not, depending on the conditionals for where a raid happens. And then, that 46-minute marker has passed and a raid has spawned. What happens at that point? So first and foremost, you get a message saying, it's a bit of a flavor text, so it's not necessarily like a raid is happening, but it's something narratively contextualizing a raid is happening. It's like enemies are stirring in the forest or something dramatic like so. Enemies spawn 40 to 80 meters away from the player in hunt mode. Hunt mode is the enemies are alerted and they know your location up to 200 meters away. Can't really run away from them. You might be able to, but it's difficult. And then base structures suppress spawning for 10 meters around them. So basically this means that enemies won't spawn right on top of your base. They're going to be spawning away from you or away from anything you've built and then coming to attack you. The raid is largely comprised of different enemies, different enemy types, different spawn intervals, and maximum numbers. It's kind of across the board. If you're really curious about this, you can check the wiki. They have all of that. But as a simple example, like at the very beginning of the raid, you can be raided by boars and lizards. They're called necks, but they're lizards. There's a maximum of 2 spawns for each one, and they respawn like 10 seconds or 20 seconds, I forget. So, if you kill 2, in 10 seconds one spawns, and then if you leave that one alone, 10 seconds later another one spawns. Everyone understands respawns and what that means. At the start of the raid, a 96-meter radius. I don't know why it's 96 meters. There's probably some like ×2 base pair sort of range. Anyways, a 96-meter radius around the player at the raid start happens. So depending on where you are around your base, it's going to be around that. And a timer starts. And the player character who is being raided, if this is like a co-op scenario, they have to remain inside the circle for the timer to tick down. If you leave the raid circle or if you go into a dungeon, the timer pauses and they continue doing stuff, which is sort of bad. Enemies spawned will prioritize attacking the players, if there's multiple, but they will attack any player-created object. Again, that's structures, walls, forges, workbenches, etc. If it's in range or if they lose aggro on the player that they were attacking. How do you win? You run out the timer. That is the only way to win. That is all the game currently cares about. The timers are different per raid. Most of them are 1.5 to 2 minutes. Several of them are 80 seconds, some are 150 seconds. I don't really know why the disparity is like that small and that across that thing, but whatever. The big kicker is that enemies respawn if they're killed. So if you're a badass, you can have, 50 skeletons dead at your feet at the end of a raid. If you are not a badass, you can be running in a circle for 2 minutes until the raid ends with nothing dead, and then they run away. Ideally nothing dead, maybe possibly you dead. So that is how that's what happens when a raid has spawned. And that is largely how you succeed against a raid or fail to succeed against a raid. Fail to succeed? That sounds weird. So what do I like about this? You can disable them. That's what I like about this system. You can turn them off. Issue solved. Don't have to deal with them anymore. I don't like anything else about this system. I'm just going to lay those cards on the table. Um, what do I hate about this specifically? A lot more than what I don't like about it. So, the lack of the communication to the player is probably my biggest issue with this. Aside from the enemies are stirring in the forest, that is the only messaging you get about a raid. There's no diegetic connection between the player character's actions and the resulting raid. There is a mechanical connection based on, all those conditionals that we just went over and all those mechanics, but nothing is forward facing to the player. They don't understand what's going on unless they're very familiar with the game. Everything is mechanics driven beneath the hood except for the start and the end message. The success conditions also, like, how do I survive? How do I defend against a raid? I kill enemies. No, I just run around in a circle. None of that is communicated to the player. The death spiral is another huge issue. So this happened to me multiple times where I got the previous tier of boss killed and then I was raided almost immediately afterwards. So I had no time to gather resources to get into the new tier of armor and weapons and be able to deal with those enemies effectively. And I had never encountered those enemies before, and it was like, surprise, we're just gonna slaughter you. And slaughter me they did. And there is a... Let me go in order. I'm sorry. So the continual respawns make killing enemies not worth it unless you are really good at killing them. If you can kill them fast and safely, potentially worth it. But if you're taking hits and damage, that's dangerous. Corpse runs is basically like, I died, I respawned, and I need to run back and get my stuff. Valheim is that kind of game where when you die, you drop everything on your body. Nothing stays, not even your hotbar, nothing. This is fine for like weapons or consumables, but armor specifically takes time to put on. And it is enough time to where if there's an enemy remotely close to you, they're going to hit you. And they're going to hit you with no armor on, and that's going to be bad. When the player character dies in Valheim, you lose some of your skill points. And this is sort of big because you're basically losing progression. So in a game where you can potentially be attacked by enemies that are vastly overpowering you, you've never encountered before, you don't know how to effectively deal with them, and you're potentially facing a severe penalty for dying to them. Where is the risk versus reward in that scenario? It is all risk and very minor reward. The third thing is just everything else. Like I said, the timer-based success it's uninteresting, and it's also not really communicated very well to the player, but also just run around in a circle for 2 minutes, and that's how I successfully defend myself. That seems kind of silly. Your base ends up wrecked, which is, it is the base raiding mechanic, so that's not fun. But more than that, it's just the time that it takes to sort of recover from a base raid. It's just a lot. And with the frequency of occurrence that this happens, it can be you're perpetually raiding, rebuilding, raiding, rebuilding. It's just kind of rough. It feels like a chore, depending on how the randomness of the universe rolls out. Respawning enemies, I talked about that being low effort versus high effort solutions and risk versus reward. And then another big thing is there's a lack of in-game defensive opportunities to use against enemies in Valheim. I didn't really go over this, but Valheim is I don't know if it's truly a voxel game, but it has terrain deformation. And that is the primary way that people will recommend you defend your base. You either dig a ditch so that enemies can't path into it, or you raise a berm, which is, you can Google that definition. It's basically sort of like a mound of dirt, so enemies can't walk over it. So if you can sort of force the enemies into one narrow position, that's how you deal with it. And to people's to people's point of argument, that is like historically accurate. You know, there are castles with ditches and moats and stuff. It just doesn't really make for very interesting gameplay, in my opinion. Okay, we got frickin' Valheim out of the way. I'm going to move on to Grounded. Spoiler alert, I like Grounded quite a bit more. Maybe an unfair comparison since Grounded is finished than Valheim, but full disclosure. So, like I said, the same sort of ingredients of a raid. You got the tiers of progression, the conditions, and then the frequency. The main thing is the faction and the reputation system. Everything in Grounded, all of the enemies anyway, are in their own... Sorry, let me back up. Not their own, but they're in a reputation system. Sometimes they're in their own reputation system. What does this mean? Red ants, they are a reputation system. They're in their own faction. Bees, they're in their own reputation. Black ants, they're in their own reputation. Their faction, sorry. They are different from red ants. It's not just like ants categorized wholly. It is black ants and red ants. It's that way across the entire game. So raid tiers, when raids happen, they have tiers correlating to difficulty. And this is on a 1 to 10 scale. So tier 1 raid, very few enemies, very easy enemies. Tier 10 raid, lots of enemies, lots of waves of enemies, and maybe the stronger versions of those enemies. To put this into sort of a in-game example, ants have like worker ants, which are sort of like non-combatant ants, but you can kill them. And then they have sort of like army ants or the soldier ants, and then you have like even buffer ants. And then lastly, the raid tier is progressive. So it increases based on your success of defending a raid, but it also can increase based on game progression. So if you build your base out of certain items, or you do these things, they're called labs, but it's effectively sort of like a dungeon. Basically, like the farther you are in the game progression, that can increase the tier of raid that can happen against you. So the raid conditionals, this one is super easy. The age of the world has to be greater than 10 days. So you won't get raided no matter what. Faction states and reputation does not change before your world is greater than 10 days old. So 0 risk for the first 10 days, which is cool. Get used to the game. The frequency of the raids, they are on a 6 to 9 day cooldown, which is around 5 hours of gameplay time. You can sleep through the night in this game, so if you do that when you can, it roughly turns out to be like 3 hours. And then 1 day is 48 real world minutes. I need to back up, because the raid conditionals, that faction state and the reputation system that I've been talking about, that's sort of a key thing that I freaking forgot to sort of gloss over it. So if I go into a territory of an enemy type, I'm going to use the red ants as an example, and I start killing red ants, they go through 3 stages, and that is they're aware of you, they're annoyed at you, and then they're enraged at you. And there's a UI element that pops up on your screen that says this, and it's communicated to the player. Not everything is purely driven by combat against the enemies. If you're in their territory, that will progressively increase over time. It's not immediate, but it is over time. And then there are a handful of other circumstances where that might contribute to that increase in reputation as well. So for the ants, if you pick up their eggs and you take their eggs, that will count towards you as if you are just killing enemies. And then the enraged, when the faction is enraged at you, that is the condition where a raid can happen. It doesn't happen for the first 2. It just tells you, like, you're doing a thing, you're still doing a thing, you're in danger, and then, oh, you're done for now, buddy. A raid is about to happen. So everything lines up. We are once again getting raided. The faction is enraged at us. It has passed the cooldown time. A raid has spawned. What happens now? So the first and foremost, you get a UI message saying payback has arrived with the faction that is listed. This is I called this the faction state message. So I know who is attacking me, how many waves of enemies are attacking me, the tier of the raid that is attacking me, and there is also in-world UI beacons of where the raid is coming from and where they are attacking, specifically like which element in your base they are attacking. So you have a very clear line of they're coming from the west and they're going to this storage chest right here. Enemies' target prioritization is storage and utilities. Again, utilities is like workbenches or machines or something. But they will attack like base structures, like walls and doors and stuff, if they can't target other stuff first and foremost. So they don't target the player character, but they attack those things. If they are attacked by the player character, they will retaliate. So then they switch prioritization to the player character, and then they attack them. End conditions are really easy. You either succeed, you kill all the enemies, or you fail. Failure is like they destroyed the thing they were there to destroy, and then they leave if they are still alive to do so. Very intuitively understood, in my opinion. What do I like about this? There's a lot. So there's a very clear connection between the player's actions and the consequences. I made this happen. The game just didn't mechanically cause this to happen, is what I like about this. All of the associated messaging with the reputation system, payback has arrived. I understand how many enemies, how many waves, what kinds of enemies, where they're spawning from, where they're going. There is no excuse not to know like what is happening during a raid. And I feel like it doesn't need an explicit message of to succeed against this raid, kill all the enemies, because that seems just kind of intuitively understood. Enemies not targeting you is a pretty huge force multiplier, in my opinion. It negates the whole death spiral effect, where you're getting overwhelmed by a ton of enemies. You die, you respawn, you have to run back to your corpse, get your weapons, and then hopefully attack some enemies, and hopefully they're not in a swarm. It still results in tension, which is I need to protect my base, but it negates danger because only enemies that I attacked are going to attack me back. This lets me be tactical. It lets me make decisions. Do I attack the weaker enemies? Do I attack the more dangerous enemies? Ooh, choices. Interesting. It's a huge thing that seems very minor. It's like one small change, but it results in a lot. Grounded also has better defensive options available to the player. You have traps, you have turrets, there is like a side quest that gives you a buff against raids. Specifically, there's a lot more options in terms of how to engage with this mechanic, which I really like. What do I not like about it? There are a couple of things. First and foremost, there is sort of a lack of incentive. If I'm killing ants and ants raid me, it's a resource-based game, and I've already killed a whole bunch of ants, so I have all the resources I need, presumably. And it becomes like, nothing is like, oh boy, I'm getting raided. Cool, great. It's more like, ugh, okay, fine, I need to defend myself. It's a bit of a chore. That's pretty minor, though, honestly. The second one is, like, your base gets wrecked. If you fail to defend your sting. So the part that I don't like about this is sort of underlying with the game systems where your inventory has limited number of slots, things have weight, so rebuilding a wrecked base becomes tedious. Imagine like rebuilding everything in a short amount of time immediately after it's all been destroyed. It's just like, man, that sucks. But that is honestly about it. So my spicy hot take is that neither of these systems, even though I really liked Grounded take on the base rating mechanic, neither of these systems are successful in that they create a meaningful positive experience that players want to engage with. I have receipts, don't worry. Why would I say this? So, if you go do a simple Google search for both of these games and you talk about where should I build my base? How do I defend my base? What kind of base is like good or effective or something? The primary discourse around the conversation around this question will boil down to build your base here in this location to either negate or mitigate the base raiding mechanic. Valheim is a procedurally generated game, so it doesn't really have those concrete static locations to build, but it'll have like build in this way to negate or mitigate base raids. And that is largely what I was talking about before, the ditches or the berms. If you're surrounded by a ditch, you can't be raided. And I think the reason for this is because loss aversion is an extremely powerful thing. People don't like to lose things, and they will go to great lengths to avoid it. If you're sort of interested in the psychology of game design and loss aversion, if you're working on a game where like people can lose stuff, there's a lot written about this. There's a lot of it's like human psychology. There's a lot on it. So in the previous slide where I talked about Valheim's mechanics, where these base structures suppress spawning for 10 meters. Can you think of a way to build a base that doesn't have natural barriers or borders to defend your base against enemies that spawn 40 to 80 meters away? I'll give you a minute. I suspect some of you will get this. Okay, I gave you like 3 seconds. So, if you came up with an answer of I build a base structure every 10 or 15 meters apart so that that 10 meter radius is overlapping with all the other things, so it ends up looking like this around my base. That would be a horrible answer, but is also the correct answer. This is the prevailing advice that I see when people talk about building bases, like plop down a whole bunch of workbenches around your base so that nothing can spawn there. And it's like, is that a meaningful mechanic that you are now engaging with? You're just making it not happen. That seems kind of poopy dog water. So, yeah. I didn't initially have solutions, or proposed solutions maybe. But like ending on that note previously felt a bit too negative, so I'm like, man, I need to not be just a downer here. So my napkin solutions that I thought about for maybe like 10 minutes are damaged versus destroyed is the first one. I've seen previous games do this where a damaged machine or utility or a wall or whatever it's still physically there. It can still physically require resources to repair it, but it's not missing from the scene. And that seems like a psychological difference, I guess. Like functionally, it is gone. It is not functional. It's the same as if it is destroyed, right? But psychologically, it feels not as bad because it is there. There's a lot of talks on this as well in game development. The very sort of standout example to me is the experience in World of Warcraft, where initially World of Warcraft players would earn 50% experience unless they were rested. Then they got a bonus to 100%. And seeing that you're only getting 50% of your experience when you're killing monsters feels bad. So what they did is they doubled everything. So you, by default, get 100%, the rested bonus gets 200%, and then the value of how much you need is just doubled to account for the whole change between 50% to 100%. It mechanically did nothing. Nothing changed. The numbers are still the same, the time it takes to do a thing is still the same, but people responded to that better. And this seems to fall under the same umbrella. Functionally, it's sort of the same thing, but It felt better. Um, Better means to defend your base is another solution. I don't want to frickin' dig a ditch to defend my base because it feels like I am exploiting a mechanic of pathfinding and AI rather than actually defending my base. If I have big spiky sticks and enemies will run against those spiky sticks and kill themselves, and maybe the spiky sticks, they have a hit point value that they sort of like tick down after as a deployed trap or something, that feels way better than just I build a big pile of dirt that enemies have to path around because it seems arbitrary. Another sort of idea that I had was a target prioritization for players during raids. So this kind of exists for Grounded because you can see what the enemies are attacking before you attack them, but not so for Valheim, really. You kind of have to see with your own eyes what they're attacking if they're not attacking you. But I kind of thought, like, if there was a commander unit that is sort of directing the raid, they could be well defended. They could have multiple enemies guarding them versus rather just picking off the lone attackers at a time. And it would sort of be a way to end the raid early. So you can have another decision to make as a player. Do I take the risk to end the raid early by tackling this difficult challenge? Or do I defend my base and pick off the attackers? There could be a thing there. I don't know. Another one is sort of the low-hanging fruit of the game industry, and that's rewards. There could be unique rewards for defending against raids against certain factions, potentially necessary for game progression. Like, I need a resource to build this machine that only happens during raids. There could be achievements, there could be cosmetics, all of that stuff. I had to double check to see if there was an achievement for, like, defending or triggering raids in Grounded, and there is not. So there's that. And then, that's just sort of like me brainstorming for like 10 minutes, which isn't a lot of time, and I'm just one person. People could come up with 10 times the amount of things for this. Relatively easy. So that's it. That's all I got. Pretty short video. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, I don't know if you do or not, but if you enjoyed this, let me know. Maybe I'll do more. I didn't really plan on doing this. I kind of just had random opinions about this mechanic that I wanted to word vomit, so to speak, into the void. I don't have anything planned on the horizon, but, if people are interested in this, I can probably find something. But that is all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take it easy. Bye-bye.